The evening was calm, but inside the theater the air felt heavy. People had gathered for a charity event, and though it was meant to be filled with joy, something had gone wrong earlier in the day. Keanu Reeves sat quietly in the front row, his hands folded gently together. He looked calm, but inside he could feel the tension around him. Whispers moved through the hall like cold wind. Many people were waiting to see how he would react, because even the smallest thing he said or did often touched hearts. Sydney Sweeney was seated a few rows behind him. She had been excited about the event, but as soon as she walked in, she noticed the strange mood. People were not smiling as much as they usually did at gatherings like this. Something had shifted. She glanced at Keanu, then at the crowd, and she could feel an invisible wall of silence between everyone. It was the kind of silence that makes you restless, where every sound feels louder than it should be. The host of the evening tried to speak, but his voice trembled. There had been a small misunderstanding between two groups who were supporting the event. It was not a fight, but enough of a disagreement to leave the atmosphere cracked. The smiles had faded, the warmth had thinned. Some people looked upset, others looked confused. The whole purpose of the gathering, to spread kindness and hope, suddenly felt distant. Keanu noticed it right away. He had seen moments like this before. He knew how quickly people could lose their sense of togetherness if a small spark of negativity entered the room. His eyes softened as he looked around. He did not rush to speak because Keanu was not a man of quick, empty words. He believed in waiting for the right moment, the moment when words could heal instead of just fill silence. Sydney kept her eyes on him. She had admired Keanu for years, not only for his work but for his humility. He never placed himself above others. He treated people with respect, no matter who they were. Tonight, though, she saw something different in him. He looked almost as if he was carrying the weight of the entire room, and yet he remained gentle. It made her wonder what he might do to change the mood. After a while, the silence grew heavier. People shifted in their seats, waiting. The host tried again to lighten the air with a joke, but it fell flat. A few weak smiles appeared and disappeared quickly. That was when Keanu slowly stood up. The sound of his chair moving back was enough to draw every eye in the hall. No one spoke. The air felt charged with expectation, as if time itself was waiting for his words. He looked around the room, his expression calm but kind. He did not rush, and his silence in that moment spoke louder than the noise of the earlier whispers. Then he turned his gaze to Sydney. She felt a small jolt in her chest, surprised that his eyes had found hers. It was not the kind of look that embarrassed someone. It was a look that made you feel seen, as if he understood exactly what you were feeling. And then he said something to her, words so simple that they cut through the tension like light through fog. "Sometimes," Keanu said gently, "one smile can remind everyone why we are here." The hall went quiet again, but this time the silence was different. It was no longer heavy with unease. It was filled with the soundless beat of people taking in the weight of his words. Keanu did not point fingers, he did not explain the misunderstanding, and he did not try to fix everything with long speeches. Instead, he offered something everyone could understand, a simple reminder of why they had come together: respect, kindness, and shared purpose. Sydney's eyes softened. Without even realizing it, she smiled. It was not forced, not planned. It was the natural kind of smile that rises when your heart feels touched. Others saw her smile, and slowly more appeared around the room. The mood shifted, just as if a door had opened and fresh air had poured in. The heavy silence dissolved. People began to relax in their seats, and a quiet warmth spread among them. Keanu sat down again, not waiting for applause or recognition. He did not need it. He had said what needed to be said, and that was enough for him. But for Sydney, the moment was unforgettable. Those simple words had not only changed the mood of the room, They had changed something inside her as well. She realized the true strength of kindness was not in grand gestures, but in the smallest ones, shared at the right moment. She whispered to herself, "He is right. One smile can change everything." And in that moment, the story truly began. After the moment Keanu spoke to Sydney, the whole room seemed lighter. People leaned back into their chairs, and the tension that had gripped the theater loosened. It felt as if everyone had taken a slow breath at the same time. Sydney kept thinking about his words, replaying them in her head. They were so simple, yet they had power because they came from the right place. She had heard many famous people speak before, but most of their words felt like decoration. Keanu's words, however, felt like truth. The event slowly began again. The host, now more at ease, introduced a short performance. Music filled the hall and people clapped softly. But even while the music played, Sydney noticed that her thoughts were not on the stage. They were with the man who had changed the entire mood with only one line. She kept asking herself why those words touched her so deeply. Was it because she had also been feeling the weight of silence and needed someone to break it? Or was it because she saw how one person's choice to stay kind could affect hundreds? Keanu, meanwhile, sat quietly again. He did not act as if he had done anything special. He watched the performance, his face calm, his hands resting on his knees. Sydney admired this even more. Most people, after shifting the energy of a crowd, would carry themselves with pride, waiting for recognition. But Keanu simply melted back into the group, as if his words belonged to everyone, not just to him. When the music ended, there was a pause before the next part of the evening began. During that pause, Sydney felt an urge she could not ignore. She wanted to speak to him. She wanted to know if his words came from a place of thought or if they simply rose naturally from his heart. She wanted to understand him, not as a star, but as a person. So she stood, her steps quiet but steady, and she walked toward the front row. As she moved, some people noticed. Whispers followed her, just as they had earlier when she entered the hall. She was young, bright, and admired by many, but tonight she felt small next to the quiet presence of Keanu. When she reached him, she hesitated. He turned to look at her, and once again, his eyes carried no weight of judgment. He looked at her as if she was not someone on a stage or in a magazine, but simply another soul sharing the same space.
"May I sit here?"
she asked softly. He nodded with a gentle smile. Of course. She sat down beside him, and for a moment she did not know what to say. She felt nervous, almost as if she was speaking to an older brother or a teacher she respected deeply. Then, gathering her courage, she whispered, "You changed the mood of the whole room with just one sentence. How did you know what to say?" Keanu thought for a moment before answering. His voice was quiet, yet steady. "I did not know," he said. "I only knew how I felt. When I see people drifting apart, I remind myself of something simple. Sometimes, the right words are not the ones that explain everything, but the ones that remind people of what they already know." His words sank into her like water on dry ground. She realized he was right. People had come to the event already knowing it was about kindness and unity. They did not need explanations about what went wrong. They needed a reminder of what was already inside them, and Keanu had given them that. As they spoke, someone behind them whispered too loudly, "Look at them, Keanu Reeves and Sydney Sweeney, sitting together like old friends." A few others chuckled, some with warmth, some with curiosity. Sydney felt her cheeks grow warm. She wondered if people thought she was trying to make a scene. But Keanu glanced at her and shook his head gently, as if telling her not to worry. His calmness washed over her, and her nervousness faded. Soon the event moved forward again. Speeches were given, stories were shared. But Sydney and Keanu, though listening, also found themselves exchanging small thoughts now and then. She noticed how he always paid full attention to the speakers, nodding slightly, never distracted. He treated every voice with respect, no matter how small. It reminded her that humility was not about lowering yourself, but about lifting others. Later in the evening, a young boy from the audience was invited to speak. His voice shook as he stepped to the microphone. He spoke about losing his father last year and how difficult it was for his family. The boy paused several times, almost breaking into tears, but he continued. People listened in silence. Many of them moved. Keanu leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the boy with full attention. Sydney felt her chest tighten at the honesty in the boy's words. When the boy finished, there was soft applause, but it was filled with emotion, not performance. Keanu stood again, but this time he walked toward the boy. The hall grew still. He knelt down to the boy's level and whispered something that no one else could hear. The boy's face shifted from sadness to a small, fragile smile. Then Keanu hugged him gently, and the audience could no longer hold back. They clapped with real warmth, and some even wiped their eyes. Sydney felt tears gather in her own eyes. She had seen many events, many shows of kindness, but this was different. It was not staged. It was not for applause. It was real, and it carried weight. She realized in that moment that she was watching not just a famous actor, but a man who carried respect for every soul he met. The night continued, but the energy had changed completely. The hall was no longer filled with whispers or tension. It was filled with togetherness. And for Sydney, something deeper began. She felt a seed inside her, an understanding that kindness, when lived with honesty, had the power to change not just rooms, but lives. And though she did not yet know it, the words Keanu had spoken earlier were only the beginning. Soon, something he would say to her directly would not only change her mood, but alter the path of her heart in ways she could never have predicted. The night after the event, Sydney could not sleep. She lay in her room, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment in her mind. She thought about the silence that had filled the hall, about Keanu's calm presence, about the way he spoke words so simple yet so powerful. And most of all, she thought about the boy he had comforted. The image of that small smile on the boy's face would not leave her. It made her ask herself questions she had never asked before. How often had she spoken words that truly mattered? How often had she done something that lifted someone in need? She realized that in her world of scripts, cameras, and endless pressure, she often forgot the small things that touched people most. The following morning, sunlight spilled through her window, but it did not feel like an ordinary morning. She felt restless, as if something inside her had shifted. She picked up her phone several times, her fingers hovering over the screen, tempted to send a message to Keanu. But then she hesitated. Would it be strange? Would it seem like she was reaching out just because of his fame? But deep inside, she knew her reason was not about fame. It was about the way his words and actions had touched her heart. She wanted to learn more, not about his career, but about his way of seeing the world. As she sat in silence, her phone buzzed. It was a message from the event's coordinator. They were planning a small gathering to thank those who had supported the charity. Sydney read the details and noticed Keanu's name on the list. Her heart skipped a beat. This was not something planned by her, but fate seemed to place them together again. She decided she would go, though part of her felt nervous. That evening, the gathering was held in a quiet garden, with soft lights strung above the tables. The setting was smaller, more intimate than the large theater event. People greeted one another warmly, their laughter floating through the cool night air. Sydney walked in wearing something simple, not flashy, because she did not want attention tonight. She wanted to feel like herself, not like the person on posters and screens. She scanned the garden and saw Keanu standing near a small fountain, speaking to an elderly couple with full respect, as if they were the most important people in the room. She admired that. Gathering courage, she approached him. He noticed her before she could speak, and his gentle smile appeared again. "Good evening," he said, his voice soft but welcoming.
Good evening,
she replied, her voice carrying a slight nervousness.
May I join you?
Always, he answered. They walked together to a quiet corner of the garden. The lights above them cast a warm glow, and the sound of water trickling from the fountain created a calm background. For a moment, they both stood silently, watching the ripples move. Then Sydney finally spoke.
Last night, when you spoke to that boy, I felt something. It was like the whole room changed. How do you do that? How do you carry such peace even in heavy moments?
Keanu looked at the water, his reflection shifting in the ripples. Peace is not something I always have, he said slowly. I have lived through loss. I have felt pain, just like anyone. But over time I learned something. Pain can make you bitter, or it can make you gentle. I chose gentle because the world already has enough bitterness. His words reached her deeply. She had heard people talk about pain before, but never in this way. Most spoke about overcoming it, defeating it, escaping it. But Keanu spoke about turning pain into gentleness, about using it as a tool to soften rather than harden. It made her chest tighten with emotion because she too had her silent struggles, moments of doubt, of loneliness, of feeling unseen despite being in the spotlight. Suddenly, she wanted to tell him everything, but she held herself back. Tonight was not about her. Tonight, she wanted to listen. As they stood there, a group of young volunteers came over to thank Keanu for attending. They were nervous, their hands fidgeting, their words stumbling, but he gave them his full attention. He asked about their lives, their studies, their dreams. He listened as if each of their voices carried weight. Sydney watched quietly, realizing something important. Respect was not just about grand actions. Respect was in the small details, looking into someone's eyes, hearing their words, valuing their presence. When the volunteers left, Keanu turned back to her. "You asked me yesterday how I knew what to say," he said. "The truth is, I do not always know. I only try to speak with honesty, because honesty is what people remember when everything else fades." His words lingered in the night air. Sydney nodded, feeling her own thoughts begin to shift. She realized that what had touched her was not only his kindness, but his authenticity. In a world where many hid behind masks, he stood with no mask at all, and that was rare. As the gathering came to an end, Keanu walked her to the gate. Before they parted, he said something she would never forget. "Remember, Sydney," he said softly, "people may not recall what we wore, what we achieved, or even what we did on stage, but they will always remember how we made them feel." Those words struck her heart like a gentle thunder. She smiled, not because she was expected to, but because she felt it. She whispered, "Thank you." And then she walked away, carrying those words inside her as if they were a lantern in the dark. What she did not know was that this lantern would soon guide her through a storm she had not yet seen, a storm that would test her strength, her humility, and the bond she was beginning to share with Keanu. The days after the garden gathering felt different for Sydney. She carried Keanu's words like a quiet echo in her heart. People will always remember how we made them feel. It replayed in her mind when she woke, when she walked into meetings, when she sat under the bright lights of a film set. But as comforting as the words were, they also became a mirror. She began to notice how often people around her felt rushed, ignored, or unseen. She realized how easy it was to forget the small things that mattered most. Then came a day that would test her. Sydney had been invited to a press conference for her upcoming project. The room was filled with flashing cameras, eager reporters, and restless energy. She had done this many times before, but today something felt heavier. Questions came at her quickly, some kind, some sharp. A few reporters pressed on topics unrelated to her work, digging into her private life, twisting small truths into harsh stories. She smiled politely, answered calmly, but inside her chest tightened. Every word felt like walking on thin glass. As the questions grew harsher, the room began to shift. The warmth of curiosity turned into the chill of judgment. She felt cornered, and the silence between each question felt like the cold pause before a storm. She looked around, trying to stay strong, but her heart beat faster with each demand from the press. And then, almost like a quiet rescue, Keanu entered the room. He had been scheduled for another interview nearby, and hearing the noise, he stepped in. His presence did not need an announcement. People noticed him instantly, and the room fell into a strange stillness. The flashing cameras pointed toward him, voices lowered, and the air changed just as it had at the charity event. Sydney's eyes met his, and though she did not say a word, he seemed to understand her struggle. He walked calmly to the front, greeting the reporters with respect, and then took a seat beside her. His quiet presence steadied her like an anchor in stormy water. One reporter, still eager for a reaction, asked a sharp question. "Sydney, do you think you're ready for roles like this, or is it all just image?" The words stung, and Sydney's lips parted, unsure of how to respond without sounding defensive. Before she could speak, Keanu leaned toward the microphone, his voice calm, even gentle. "When someone works hard," he said, "it is not for us to question their worth. Effort, dedication, and heart are what truly matter. And I have seen all of that in her." The words fell into the room like a heavy stone dropped into water, sending ripples across every face. Reporters shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The tone of the room changed. The hostility melted into silence, and then into softer questions. The storm had passed, not because of force, but because of respect. Sydney felt her throat tighten with emotion. She wanted to say something, to thank him in front of everyone, but she held it back. Instead, she took a slow breath and answered the next questions with calm confidence. The weight on her chest eased, and she finished the conference with her dignity intact. Afterward, as they stepped outside into the evening air, Sydney turned to him. "You saved me in there," she said quietly. He shook his head, a faint smile touching his lips. "No, I didn't. You already had the strength. You just needed someone to remind the room of it." Those words sank deeper than the rest. Sydney realized he was not only defending her, he was teaching her. Strength did not always roar. Sometimes strength was found in calmness, in patience, in refusing to let negativity dictate the moment. They walked together down the quiet street, the city lights glowing above them. People passed by, some recognizing them, some not. But in that moment, they were not stars, not faces on screens. They were simply two people walking side by side, sharing silence that carried more meaning than words. Yet even as the night felt calm, a shadow lingered in Sydney's mind. She knew the world of fame was not forgiving. Whispers spread quickly, judgments grew easily, and storms often returned stronger. What Keanu had said that night had changed the mood instantly, but deep down, she wondered, would she always find peace through his words? Or would there come a moment when even his calm presence could not shield her from what was ahead? This quiet question stayed with her, like a thread of suspense woven into her thoughts, a reminder that the story was far from over. The weeks after the press conference brought Sydney both calm and chaos. The calm came from Keanu's words, which lingered in her heart like steady light. The chaos came from the outside world, where rumors twisted and spread faster than truth. Articles appeared online, some praising her strength, others painting her as fragile. She tried not to read them, but whispers found their way into every corner of her life. Still, she remembered Keanu's voice. "You already had the strength. You just needed someone to remind the room of it. Those words kept her standing, even when she felt the ground shifting beneath her. But storms have a way of finding cracks. One evening, as she walked out of a studio, a crowd of paparazzi swarmed her. Their cameras flashed, their questions sharp and unkind. One voice cut through louder than the rest. "Sydney, people say you're leaning on Keanu Reeves for attention. Do you have anything to say about that?" The words struck like a blade. She froze for a moment, her throat dry. She wanted to shout that it wasn't true, that her respect for him had nothing to do with attention, but her voice failed. Flashes of light blinded her, footsteps crowded her, and she felt the weight of hundreds of eyes pressing in. Then, through the noise, a steady hand touched her shoulder. She turned and Keanu was there. His face was calm, his presence firm, and with just that touch, the chaos seemed to bend around him. He did not push the cameras away. He did not shout. Instead, he raised his hand gently and said, "Please show respect." His voice was soft, but it carried power. The crowd quieted, not fully, but enough for space to open. He guided her through with steady steps, and the two of them slipped into the waiting car. Inside, silence fell, broken only by the sound of her uneven breathing. She pressed her hands together, trying to steady herself. "Are you all right?" he asked. Her eyes filled with tears she had tried to hold back. "Why do they twist everything? Why do they look at kindness and call it weakness?" He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Because the world is quick to judge what it does not understand. But their judgment is not your truth. Your truth lives in how you carry yourself, not in what they say." His words cut through her pain, but they also revealed something else. She realized he was not just speaking for her. He was speaking from his own scars. She saw it in his eyes, the quiet shadows of loss, the memories of battles fought in silence, the weight he had carried alone. For the first time, she understood that his gentleness was not built in ease but in hardship. The car moved through the city, lights flashing past the windows. Sydney wiped her tears, her heart both heavy and full. "I don't know if I can be like you," she whispered. Keanu shook his head gently. "You don't need to be like me. You only need to be yourself, with honesty, with kindness, with resilience. That is enough." His words warmed her, but even as she felt comfort, another thought lingered. How long could she hold on to this strength when the storms outside kept growing? A week later, the storm returned stronger. A major magazine published a story twisting her bond with Keanu, painting it as something it was not. The headlines spread across social media, and the comments grew sharp and cruel. Strangers judged her without knowing her. Strangers built stories out of shadows. Sydney sat in her room, staring at the glowing screen of her phone. The words cut deeper than she wanted to admit. She wanted to ignore them, but each comment felt like a stone thrown at her heart. Her chest ached, her hands shook, and for the first time she felt close to breaking. Then her phone buzzed. A message appeared. It was from Keanu. "Don't let their noise steal your peace. If you need me, I'll be here." Her eyes blurred with tears. She closed her phone and took a deep breath. In that moment, she realized something. Storms would always come, but she was no longer standing in them alone. Yet even with that comfort, a quiet fear remained. What if the storm one day grew so strong that even Keanu's calm presence could not hold it back? What if she had to face something that neither kindness nor resilience could easily mend? The story was no longer about one night or one smile. It was becoming a test of survival, of dignity, and of how two souls could carry each other through the darkest hours. The storm grew heavier than either of them expected. The magazine article had opened a door, and soon more voices rushed through. Social media filled with endless comments, some kind, but many cruel. Strangers judged their friendship without knowing their hearts. Whispers turned into headlines, and headlines turned into shadows that followed Sydney everywhere she went. She tried to stay calm, repeating Keanu's words to herself. Their judgment is not your truth. But late at night, when she was alone, those words sometimes felt far away. She stared at her phone, scrolling through the harsh words that strangers wrote, and felt her chest grow tight. She wondered why people were so quick to break what they did not build. Keanu saw the change in her. When they met, he noticed the tiredness in her eyes, the way her smile carried weight instead of ease. One evening, he invited her to a quiet place outside the city. It was a small cabin surrounded by trees, far from flashing cameras, far from the noise of the world. When she arrived, he greeted her with the same calm smile, but his eyes carried concern. "You needed silence," he said simply. For the first time in weeks, Sydney felt she could breathe. The air was fresh, the sound of leaves rustling was soft, and the world felt distant. They sat on the wooden porch together, listening to the night. For a while, neither spoke. Then Sydney's voice broke the silence. "I feel like I'm drowning," she whispered. "No matter what I do, they twist it. No matter what I say, they question it. I want to be strong, but I'm tired, Keanu. I'm so tired." He listened without interrupting, his hands folded gently. When she finished, he spoke softly. "I know that feeling. I have lived through it. When people write stories about you, when they make noise out of your silence, it feels like you lose yourself. But remember this, who you are is not written in their words. It is written in how you keep going, even when it hurts." Her eyes filled with tears. "But what if I can't keep going? What if the storm breaks me?" He turned to her, his gaze steady, his voice gentle but firm. "Then lean on the people who care for you until you find your strength again. There is no shame in needing others. Strength is not walking alone. It is knowing when to let someone walk beside you." His words struck deep. She had always believed strength meant independence, standing tall no matter what. But Keanu was teaching her something new, that strength could also mean reaching out, sharing the weight, letting kindness carry what pride could not. The night grew colder, and they sat closer, the quiet around them wrapping like a blanket. Sydney felt something she had not felt in a long time: safety. For a moment she allowed herself to rest, to let the storm outside fade. But peace never lasted long. A few days later, another wave came. This time, a cruel video surfaced online, edited to twist her words from an interview. It spread quickly, making her appear arrogant, ungrateful, and disrespectful. The truth had been cut away, leaving only a false image. People shared it, mocked it, believed it. Sydney's phone buzzed endlessly. Offers she had worked for began to slip away. Directors hesitated, brands pulled back. It was not just whispers now, it was damage. Her career, her reputation, her voice, everything felt like it was breaking. She sat in her apartment, staring at the screen, shaking. "It's over," she whispered to herself. "They've taken everything." And then the doorbell rang. She opened it, and Keanu stood there, quiet but steady. He saw the fear in her eyes, the hopelessness in her face. Without a word, he stepped inside and sat with her. She broke down, tears falling faster than she could stop. "I don't know how to fight this anymore," she said through sobs. "I feel powerless. I feel small. I feel like nothing I do will ever be enough." He waited for her to finish, then spoke slowly, with a calmness that felt like stone beneath waves. "You are not powerless. They may take your image, they may twist your words, but they cannot touch your heart, your truth, your kindness. That belongs to you, and only you. The world will forget headlines. What lasts is the way you keep showing up with honesty." She shook her head. "But how can I keep going when I've already lost so much?" He leaned forward,
his voice carrying quiet strength. Because you are more than what you've lost. You are more than their noise. And sometimes, the only way to change the storm is not to fight it, but to outlast it. His words settled in her like fire in the dark, fragile but warm. She realized he was not promising that the storm would end quickly. He was reminding her that storms, no matter how fierce, do not last forever. That night, she did not find all the answers. She did not find full peace. But she found something just as important. She found the will to keep going one more day. And sometimes, that was enough. Yet deep inside, she also knew the storm was not finished. The hardest test was still waiting, and when it came, it would not only challenge her strength, but also test the bond between her and Keanu in ways neither of them could yet see. The storm reached its peak one cold evening, when a live television debate invited critics to speak openly about Sydney. The show was broadcast across the country, and headlines had promised drama. The producers wanted conflict, and the guests they invited were ready to attack. Sydney sat backstage, her hands trembling. She had agreed to attend, hoping to defend herself, to show truth against twisted words. But now, as she listened to the voices on stage calling her ungrateful, arrogant, and dependent, her courage began to slip away. Her chest grew heavy, her throat tightened, and she felt the weight of every judgment pressing down. Keanu was there too, seated quietly beside her. He did not try to fill the silence with empty comfort. Instead, he simply placed a hand on hers, steady and warm. When she looked at him, his eyes carried the same calm strength she had seen from the very beginning. "You don't have to fight alone," he whispered. Her heart steadied, but fear still gripped her. The stage manager called her name, and the lights drew her forward. She walked slowly onto the stage, facing the panel of critics, the cameras, and the audience waiting for her to fall. The first question struck hard. "Sydney, many believe you've built your image on sympathy and borrowed respect from Keanu Reeves. How do you respond?" The audience grew quiet, waiting for her to stumble. For a moment, she froze. Then she heard Keanu's voice in her memory. "Honesty is what people remember when everything else fades." She took a breath, lifted her eyes, and spoke. "I will not pretend the last weeks have been easy. I have been judged, mocked, and misunderstood. I have felt weak, I have felt broken. But I have also learned something. Strength is not about never falling. Strength is about standing again, even when the world tries to keep you down. I have learned from Keanu, but not because I needed his fame. I learned from him because he reminded me of something we all forget. Kindness and humility are not weakness. They are strength." The hall fell silent. The critics shifted, unprepared for the steadiness in her voice. One tried again, pressing her. "But don't you think you've leaned too heavily on him?" Before she could answer, Keanu, who had remained quiet until then, spoke from his seat in the audience. His voice carried across the room, firm yet calm. "We all lean on someone at times. Life is not meant to be walked alone. I have leaned on others in my darkest hours. She leaned on me in hers. That is not weakness. That is humanity." The audience stirred, their silence breaking into applause. It began small, then grew stronger until the room echoed with clapping. The critics had no words left. The debate had ended before it could even begin. Sydney's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were not from pain. They were from relief, from the release of weeks of weight. She smiled, soft, real, unforced, and in that moment, the world seemed to shift again. After the show, when they stepped outside into the quiet night, she turned to Keanu. "You changed everything tonight," she said softly. He shook his head. "No, Sydney, you did. You found your voice, and you spoke with truth. All I did was remind you of what was already inside you." She stood there, her heart full, realizing the journey had brought her somewhere she had not expected. She no longer felt like a young woman drowning in whispers. She felt like someone who had walked through fire and come out stronger, gentler, and more real. As they walked together down the empty street, the city lights glowing above, Sydney thought of the very first words he had spoken to her. Sometimes, one smile can remind everyone why we are here. And she understood now, fully and deeply, what those words meant. Because her smile had changed too. It was no longer fragile. It was no longer a mask. It was the smile of someone who had found resilience, respect, and kindness within herself. The storm had not broken her. It had shaped her. And beside her, walking in quiet solidarity, was the man who had reminded her that even in the darkest night, one gentle voice could change the mood instantly, and one act of kindness could change a life forever.